In today's news, Commonwealth leaders have agreed the time has come for a conversation about reparations for the slave trade. Now, this is despite the UK's desire to keep the subject off the agenda at a two-day summit in Samoa. A document signed by 56 heads of government, including UK Prime Minister Kester Onor, acknowledges calls for discussions on reparatory justice for the abhorrent transatlantic slave trade. The statement says it is time for a meaningful, truthful, and respectful conversation. Sir Keir said that there had been no discussions about money at the meeting and that the UK is very clear in its position that it would not pay reparations. Well, Senior Research Fellow at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, Dr. Kester Onor joins us now to discuss the resolution of the Commonwealth leaders on reparations, despite the UK's opposition, and what exactly the significance of the push for reparations for slavery, and if the UK will ever agree to pay. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Doctor.
Thank you for having me.
So the UK has made it clear that they're not going back on their stance to paying up reparations, even though last year a UN judge said the UK would likely owe more than 18 trillion pounds worth of reparations in their role for slavery in 14 Caribbean countries. What do you make of the UK's stance and how it'll affect this push?
Thank you very much. I believe that the time has come, for UK government to engage productively with a Commonwealth head of governments, on the issue of a reparation, considering the fact that enormous harm, has been done to Africans. Because if you look at the ingrained animosities and bitterness as a result of transatlantic slave trade and colonial exploitations suffered in the hands of UK, it's time at least for us to sit down together and have a proper discussion on these issues. Because you know that the cost of transatlantic slave trade cannot be overemphasized. If you look at the monumental loss in terms of human and material resources, we talk about the population lost. Between 15th and the 19th century, Africans lost about 12 to 15 million able-bodied men, to the Europeans and the UK, most especially, because they were at the forefront. Then we talk about the economic stagnations, about the young and the able-bodied men. We talk about the social and the cultural disruptions encountered. And you talk about even the legal precedents that has been set by the Germans. Because when you look at what the Germans did in Namibia, talking about notable cases, like the reparation to the Herero and the Nama people of Namibia, and the recent conversation around African-American reparation in the United States, we all now believe that it's right time for, the Commonwealth head of government to sit down with the UK government to talk about this reparation. They can no longer run away from the situation. Thank you.
No, but I'm a bit curious, what sort of reparations should Commonwealth leaders be seeking, especially African leaders? Is it financial? And if we're talking about financial, what about the deeply entrenched menace of corruption on the African continent? How meaningfully would such finances be utilized? That's assuming, that the UK eventually agrees to pay.
Well, if you talk about the kind of reparation that African leaders are seeking, first and foremost, there should be formal apology. We talk about historical acknowledgement of wrongs done to Africans. They should come out, formally apologize to the global audience, accepting their wrong. That will be the first step. Then we talk about how do you now, begin to address the ingrained animosities, the bitterness, So from that apology, we now begin to enter discussions. And it's not just apology. That apology should equally come with economic implications, talking about, and political relations definitely will be fractured. And it's equally, apart from the political relations, there should equally be things like a developmental aid. At least you know that most African countries are deeply embedded in debt trap. We should talk about debt relief and some of these things. These are some of the issues. And we talk about even cultural and educational exchanges. Talk about development aid, at least to help the economies of all these Commonwealth countries, to revamp their economy. But first and foremost, let us start from apology and acknowledgement of wrong done to Africans. And then when you talk about the corruption that is maybe you found in many Commonwealth countries, you should know that corruption is a generic term. It's not only found maybe in Africa alone and in all the, maybe in Commonwealth states. If you look at the issue of corruption, it's a globalized, case. You may say that because of our level of development that is deeply entrenched here. But we cannot be talking about corruption at this particular point when they have not even agreed to apologize. Let them do the first thing first, then we move into other issues.
Well, the UK, of course, has said that they are not paying reparations. This has irritated the other 56 countries that have signed this petition. How could them being so hardline in their stance, how could that affect the case for all the other countries and all the other individuals that are involved?
Well, thank you very much. It's an ongoing discussion. It's not a kind of closed discussion. And if the UK government insists, they are not going to pay reparation in monetary terms. There are legal precedents, just as I have mentioned. We look at the case of the notable cases, like the Germans' reparations, to the Herero and the Nama people of Namibia. And we talk about even the recent ongoing conversation, in the United States around the African-American reparation, which has set precedents giving further legitimacy at least to call for reparation. So they are not the only one involved. I know that even other countries like France, that have committed, Belgium, Portugal, that have committed heinous crimes in Africa during colonial, rules, they are equally waiting, because I believe that the whole thing will still go around.
Now, you talked about France, and of course, we've seen, countries that were once allied with France. We've seen them cutting off, from France. But that's not the case with Commonwealth countries. So when you talk about bitterness and animosity, I'm wondering really how true or how deep really is this bitterness and animosity that you're speaking about, considering the fact that, Commonwealth countries are still proud to be associated, with the Commonwealth, with the king as its head. Shouldn't it be time, to actually break off from this grouping, if indeed we want some sort of reparation from the past?
I believe that breaking off will not actually be the solution. For the fact that Commonwealth countries agree to be together, about 52 nations or thereabout, agree to come together under the umbrella of Commonwealth, acknowledging, Britain as their colonial masters, does not stop us from discussing about the issue of reparations. I believe that this discussion can actually be accentuated if we are together than maybe fighting against one another. Now that we are together under the umbrella of Commonwealth, the issue is now coming up, and I believe that we have not seen the last of this issue. We continue from this place, and I believe all hands are on deck. Before, at least in the next possible future, I believe we will arrive to somewhere better for each and every one of us.
In your opinion, and knowing the complex, somewhat delicate nature of the way funds are dispersed within some of the African countries that were part of this Commonwealth who would be seeking reparations, in your opinion, which would be the best form of reparations? Would it be monetary? Would it be those public health assistance programs? Would it be educational programs? What do you think would benefit the continent more other than monetary payment?
I believe, like I said, the first issue first. At least formal apology,
right.
And historical acknowledgement of the wrongs done to, Commonwealth member of states that we are involved in slave trade. Then secondly, it can come in form of developmental aids. Look at issues like education, health care, Then this fund can be tied to specific projects, being monitored monitored by both the Commonwealth countries and the Britain themselves, to make sure that at least these reparations get down to the people that needed it most.
Okay, so now, despite the calls for this reparation to be paid, the UK has made it clear, that it wants to move ahead with current issues, like climate change, and talk about issues of economic growth instead of looking at what happened in the past. What do you make of this?
Well, I believe that moving ahead, we have to address the injustices of the past. If you leave on all these issues unaddressed, we cannot actually find a common ground for moving ahead. So we need to go back, look at the histories, look at the injustices done to Africans and other Caribbean countries, then address it because they have to seek redress, for injustices done to them. Then from there we can now say, okay, we are moving ahead. Just like we witnessed in Nigeria during the transition, we have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So without these things, there is no need of moving forward. So I believe that we have to start from the beginning.
But then, there's a former UK ambassador, Sir Mark Grant, who says he believes it is wrong in principle to pay reparation for something that happened hundreds of years ago. Most of those that are calling for reparation now, they were not even, they weren't even born then. So he's wondering, who exactly are we paying this reparations to? I'm just wondering what you make of this line of argument.
Well, if you look at the impact of transatlantic slave trade, and look at the impact of colonial exploitation, you will discover that even up to today and tomorrow, we are still feeling the impact. You understand? So for the fact that those atrocities were committed maybe hundreds of years ago, does not mean that, that all is uhuru. You can see the way that most African countries and Caribbean countries are grossly marginalized to the point of mental stupor. And you can trace it to the colonial injustices of the past. So some of these are the reasons why we are asking for reparations.
Very well said. Great to have you in the studio with us, Dr. Kester Onor, the Senior Research Fellow at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. Great to have you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you once again for having me.